This is Power 102 Digital Wednesday. On Wednesdays, Farid Ali holds the spotlight as host of Hard Talk right here at Power 102 Digital. Just waiting for Farid to come onto the system. Today, our special guest, special invited guest is none other than David Abdullah of the MSJ, and he's going to be joining us at around 4:30. Farid, how are you going, brother?
Good afternoon, David. It's good to see you. I'm sorry for the delay there. I'm rushing to put on my jacket. I wanna look official for YouTube and Facebook viewers.
Mama.
For the listening public, good afternoon again. This afternoon, as David was saying to us, we have another David Abdullah, who will be joining us, the head of the MSJ. We're going to be discussing Trinidad and Tobago and the politics and just about everything surrounding some of the things that we face in our daily life here today. He's joining us at 4:30. So we would just be chatting, David and I, McIntyre, that is, or until 4:30, until Mr. Abdullah joins us. Um, on that note, Mr. McIntyre,
Mhm.
I read recently where Kareem Marcel, the young lawyer from the Beetham area, he featured a lot in some of the editorial when he qualified as a lawyer some 2 years ago. Um, he took up the post of alderman in Port of Spain, and now his name is featuring as a possible candidate to replace uh, Mr. Fitzgerald Hines in Laventille West. I'm seeing that the he was nominated by the Women's League, the PNM Women's League, and then when soon after that nomination, that there was a viral video where somebody was taping the proceedings. Camille Robinson Regis came out and said that, that first nomination or first meeting where he was selected, I think was 36 votes to one. That was deemed, an election or a nomination process that was riddled with inconsistencies. So there was another one. Mr. Marcel, in the subsequent uh, election or nomination process, was again properly represented by the Women's League this time, and he was their chosen candidate. The Youth League, ironically, the Youth League selected Mr. Hines ahead of Mr. Marcel. I think it was, if the voting count was correct, it's some 18 to 14. The issue now lies is we may be seeing, certain persons were calling for, and the public had a certain level of discomfort with Mr. Hines in relation to his portfolio and the fulfilling of the mandate to secure us as, the Minister of National Security. Uh, had concerns about him stepping down or had concerns for him to step down as minister. Now it looks like we might be looking at an election process in 2025 minus Mr. Hines. What are your thoughts, David? Do you think that Mr. Hines has done enough to, or has served us enough? He's been in the electoral politics since 1995. That's 29 years. Um, one view of it could be that he's bringing 29 years of experience to bear on uh, representative politics, and he has that competitive edge on Mr. Marcel, and therefore, one should stick with the tried and true as opposed to fleshing youth out there. Mr. Marcel is young in the politics. He's young in life at age 29. There's much to learn. And do you think a young person should be, at age 29, one is mature enough to engage an electorate and properly represent the interests of a community?
Well, where Kareem is concerned, he is a Bethlehem resident, first of all. Um, I think he I know him very well. Let me say that first of all. I know him very well. His mom, I wanted to for a very long time too, and I worked on many occasions with her and the team that she worked with, and the mid-morning segment, and then she came on in the afternoon. I also worked with her there, and I knew him from a little guy, and he's always been very studious in whatever he attempts to or attempted or continues to attempt, and I see him as a brilliant young man who can do well uh, in that sort of a position to represent the people of uh, Laventille West. Now, I try my best to keep out of political conversations, right? But I'm just taking part in this because it's of national interest. Um, Mr. Hines, on the other hand, like you said, 29 years of experience as compared to Kareem's now getting his feet wet in that sort of politics. But I think Kareem, you know, because I know him for a very long time. I've heard him talk about situations that took place in the Beatum, and he was able to overcome all of that and trying to study his work to get where he is now. I think he knows what's going on the ground. Now, I personally always have a problem with politicians who are elected to represent people of a certain area or a certain constituency, let me put it like that. And they are not really, the people complain. And it's not only Laventille West, right? There are lots of constituencies where people complain that the member for parliament for them, they don't get to see them as they would like to. They don't get to have conversations about representation. Maybe I should use that on broad terms um, for their constituency and the development of same. Um, Mr. Hines had problems before with the residents of that um, constituency, particularly when he went to the Beetham Gardens on one occasion, and you know what happened and transpired from that.
August 2018, when flood water is kicked on it.
Yes. So I think the quality of representation, um, being disconnected with your constituents, I think all of that is what the people are making noise about and are very uncomfortable with his non-representation, if I should say. That's how I read it in the newspaper and listen to it on the news and all of that. I think the time has come. The time was due a long time ago for all these members of parliament, whatever constituency they claim to represent or they were elected to represent. I think they should be closer to the people to find out what their needs for the development of the constituency and by extension the human resource, the development of the human resource in each of these constituencies. I have a problem like that in my area too. A lot of different constituencies, you'll hear them when things go wrong, you will hear people coming forward and singing the same song. Now, no, for me, it's difficult to understand why you would want to be a representative and have no time to hit the ground because that's where most of the people who elect you are from. Those are people on the ground. They ask for certain qualities of representation. They don't get it, and they get a lot of talk. On most occasions, you get a lot of talk, and promises and promises and promises and promises, and I think if I should shift gear to or shift position to what I think about national security, well, that's a whole different ballgame by itself. The utterances I've heard from South baffles me. It's a pass the battle kind of response all the time. But the police service is the ones to do this, and that kind of banter and thing that I try to shy away from, because I'm not a politician and I have no intention of even thinking about that. In my area, I try to do things for the community. I try to stay on the ground with the folks. As a matter of fact, I told you before that I am the president of the Larry Tour Guides Association. Even that, to get that up and running, we got a lot of talk with no action to get going the way it's supposed to go. So representation, if I should take it from that angle, is something that needs to be taken into consideration as very important. I mean, it's difficult when people will come out and elect you to represent them, so that you can air the concerns and what the constituency needs, and how it can be developed, especially where security is concerned these days, and their safety and stuff. And it's just like old talk, and nothing is being done to effect any kind of change. So I always say that the way things are going now on a global scale, we need fresh ideas, we need fresh minds, we need people who are more in tune with what change really means and what it should effect where people are concerned. If you are putting yourself up to be a representative
Well,
of
here was my thing, David.
constituency.
When we look at it, I have no issue with Mr. Hines. I think Mr. Hines has been around for 29 years and he has a lot of experience. The thing is, if it is you're serving a community for 25 years and people are divided, because at best what we can see at this stage is there's a division of opinion on him and his performance levels. If it is the Women's League, they are saying that they want the young Marcel. There's no problem with that. The Women's League entitled to an opinion. If the youth arm is saying on a vote of 18 to 14, because I'm paying attention to the vote, right? On a vote of 18 to 14, they have said that they prefer Mr. Hines. It means to say that there is a slate of opinion out there that is not overwhelmingly in favor of Mr. Hines. You have two competing interests, the Women's League and the youth arm, with different views as to who should represent them. And then when you get into the mix in terms of the nomination numbers, it's not a close call, even when it is one is saying Mr. Hines. Now, at the end of the day, what the listening public may not grasp is that the nomination committee, they have a responsibility to manage the opinions arising out of the constituency, meaning if the constituents in Laventille West are saying they want Hines or they want Marcel, at the end of the day, it's the head of the general council and the political leader that makes the decision. So they can say, well, you know what, I heard what you all have to say, but my decision is I'm going with Hines, or my decision is I'm going with. So it doesn't matter what the nominations are. The bottom line is what the political leader and the head of the general council says. So they have the casting vote.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, because a similar incident took place, or occurrence went on in the Liberia constituency.
Yeah.
All the party groups were asking for Mr. Lee Hunt to be the representative, and on 3 occasions they were rejected with that nomination. At the first instance, when they nominated Mr. Lee Hunt, that general council and whoever is responsible and has the authority, they said no, choose another. And the people again nominated Mr. Lee Hunt, and again they were turned down and said no, choose somebody else.
Great.
And
So that's a case in point. That's a case in point. So the general council and the leader has the final say.
Well, I don't understand that at all. Something that's why I don't like politics, and I will never get into politics. folks.
But if you put it this way, remember the prime minister, or in this case, in that instance, the leader of the party who's contesting the election, he has to put together a slate of people he's prepared to work with. Let us say he's not prepared to work with certain people who are nominated. The people have spoken, but I am not prepared. I am the leader, and I'm not prepared to work with him.
Yeah.
And if it is I were to move forward with this man, whoever he is, I'm not calling names. I mean, I'm just saying it could be anybody. Let us use the Lehunt example that you all had. If the PM at that time wasn't prepared to work with Lehunt, he's entitled. That's his privilege as leader to say, well, you know, I hear you. That's what you want, but that's not how I want. So hard luck. And that's basically what they come to. My thing with it is this: if I was 68 years old, I thought he was older than that, but let's work with the 68 years old. If I was 68 years old and I have drawn a parliamentary salary of $40,000 per month, which is just under $500,000 per year, multiply that by 29 years, I would think I have enough money and enough capital put on to begin a second phase of my life. Put yourself in that position. If you were working for $40,000 a month, and you had $500,000 a year being collected over a 29-year period. 3 decades. Just short of 3 decades. That's plenty money. Unless it is you have some bad habit. That's supposed to be plenty money saved, not just plenty money received.
Yeah, because so, there are other perks that they don't even
Well, we ain't even talking about the CPEP things. I'm not saying that he has that. I'm just saying that, you know, I'm using CPEP as a wild example. People are all kind of CPEP contract. They just have all kind of
if you are being paid a salary like that to represent the people, if you represent the people, and if you work with the people, and you try your best to develop the area, make sure that they're safe and secure, make sure that there are jobs and all that where performances are concerned. I don't think you have to work hard to be nominated again and re-elected by extension. I think that would be a piece of cake. But if the people are saying you don't do anything, and the people are complaining and complaining and complaining, it is difficult to understand why. Because the leader of the party says, no, I can't work with this person. I want this person. And this person who will be the choice is not performing at all.
Well, I have a feeling Mr. Hines might be very well supported by the leader of the party, because when Mr. Hines was under the leadership of Mr. Manning, if you remember well, he said Mr. Manning, quote and unquote, was underestimating him. He wasn't given any portfolio. He was simply the representative for Lavantil West for many years and not given a portfolio. In other words, he ain't got no ministry, to head no ministry, and to serve in no ministry. You know, in the same way that you have him now being Minister of National Security, he wasn't getting positions, portfolios like that. He wasn't even getting a minister.
Is the position the important thing here, or the performance of holding an office like that?
Well, two things. When you're heading a ministry, your salary is $41,000 a month.
So it's about money.
Well, you know, they like to tell you it's about service, but it's always about the money. I mean, if it is you heading a ministry at 41,000, before that, Scotland was even minister in the Ministry of National Security, and his money was 17,000 a month. Now he's become minister in the Ministry of National Security. His salary jumped from 17,000 to 41,000 a month. So why it wouldn't be about the money? You expect Mr. Scotland to say, well, you know, at 17,000 a month, I was doing more work and serving the people, and I prefer to be there where I'm serving more and working for less. When I'm on here, my salary going to jump to 41,000 from 17,000. They could put me to clean the toilet in the ministry, and ministry are going to do it. It's money, you know. You say it's making jokes. So if it is you get in a position, David, to where you're going to get good and AAA salary, or you stay there bantering at me, you think you're going to stay here to banter at me? I might get a WhatsApp message, boy.
No. Let me clarify what I'm saying. Right? I think this is a decision based on mediocrity or meritocracy, right? So if I'm offered a position where I know I'm in a position now where I can really have things done and I can, improve people's lives and all of that. Well, yes, no. If I'm not too learned about the position, if I don't know the wherewithal to deal with the position, they are technocrats. They are people who like permanent secretaries, and those kind of people who probably would have been there in ministry that will guide me. But to effect change, I must effect change. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. I mean, this man is a practicing attorney also. So if we're thinking about if the thing is about money, well, I have a big problem with that. I mean, I don't think the people elected you there to get a big salary. If you're getting a big salary, because they have a lot of perks. I mean, like you said, they can save every dime from that salary and live by their perks. And we don't have to go into what their perks are. We all know. And added to that, you're a practicing attorney. Well, why you want to represent people who are not satisfied with your performances? I have a big problem with that. I'd like to dig into it, but I have a problem with that. You know,
Well, apparently there are people, in all fairness, there are people who are very satisfied because the youth, young people, they
well,
voted, they
well,
voted.
what you're saying there is very, very, very surprising to me, and I find it kind of amazing. I
And the
don't
youth,
use the
you
word.
would think that the youth would have support young Curry.
Yeah. So the question is why? The question is why we probably don't know. The question is how did they come to make a vote like that? Were they inspired and motivated by their parents or other people who probably have
You
secret
saying inspired?
agenda?
What if somebody conspired to have them vote in a particular way?
Well, all of that. So that's why I don't like politics. I think too much of crazy things happen in politics that can hurt people. I mean, we're talking representation. Over the past week, I have been receiving a lot of posts on my phone about things that are happening in Guyana. And Mr. Irfan Ali, the president, he's a man who play. If you don't perform, he put you on the spot and ask you why you're not performing, and he'll deal with you for not performing. I have two posts on my phone that I got recently, very yesterday and day before, something like that, where he was questioning why some projects weren't completed on time, why some weren't started on time, and what about the processes that involve commencing and completion. And he took them to task. Yeah, I mean, there's an incident too where I remember on my phone too, I got a post where a contractor was given a job to do. I think it was to build roads, and he was lapsing too. And right there on the spot, he was fired, and another contractor was called in to do the job. So I can understand Mr. Ali. You understand?
Yeah.
You can be elected to represent the people, to improve people's lives, to make living easy, to make the country be on an upward trend of growth. And you're just there because you won't refuse a fat salary, or you've been there too long. In the days of Mr. Manning was a guy I had liked. I mean, personally, I sat with him already, and I had a couple of drinks with him already, and I think he had a nice vision for Trinidad and Tobago. We saw the end result of that, and then things went all kind of haywire, and that was it. But I had liked his approach to the vision that he had for Trinidad and Tobago. Now I'm on the white line, and let people know this. I am on the white line. None of the colors will ever blow my mind or motivate me to just go stick my finger in that ink for them. You know, I need to see proper representation, accountability, transparency, and all of that. A lot
Yeah.
of things keep happening in Trinidad that has us from where we were on a kind of slippery slope, and we are going down at a rate that is unbelievable. You know what I mean? If you look at what's happening now with Forex and the reasons why they closed the refinery and a whole lot of things tied to that slippery slide we are taking now downhill. You know, people might be vexed with me for saying that kind of thing, but it's obvious. It's very obvious. You know, times are changing so rapidly, especially for the people who are on the ground. A lot of them, you know, it's difficult. Sometimes I go to the supermarket, and in the supermarket, I would hear conversations that sometimes they ask me, you know, because they know I'm in the media business. So they say, Mark, what do you think about it? I try to tell them, listen, a time will come when you have the opportunity to make the change that you want to make. You have the option. People will be up, putting up themselves as representatives. The choice is yours.
But
You know?
here was my thing. At some point in time, after 29 years of service, a man have to have a conversation with himself and say, you know what, let me give you a chance. I've fought a good fight, I've finished my course, I've done all that I could do. It's time for an injection of a different kind of energy. I've made my money, I've contributed. Let me go, man, hug up my grandchildren now. It's not to say, well, you know, the superannuating you and the kicking you decided you the kicking you out the party. You were well paid for 29 years. And plus your parliamentary pension is half a monthly salary.
Well, they had
Oh,
indexed, as a matter of fact, they had indexed their money. So
well, they
if
raised their
inflation,
money when
yeah,
everybody money was being cut. They you know, opposition didn't fight them on that. They raised the salary after one term in office. You're good.
well, the thing about it is when you have your salary indexed, you know, it means that if inflation goes up, your money goes up. It don't ever come down. Just say,
Yeah. I would think that what Mr. Hines ought to have done is to say, let me give you a chance, let me step aside. I ain't gonna step in the young boy way. At age 29, he could only get better with time. In 5 years' time, whatever errors he make, people could put it up to inexperience, but they could be able to swallow it.
well, based on his experience, I think it would have been nice to him to be.
Because Manning came into the politics at age 24 in 1971, wasn't it
Yeah,
so?
yeah. What I'm saying is that maybe he should be an advisor to the young guy. You understand? Because if you ask me about the performances of that particular minister, well, I will have a response like no comment because I know I dare myself to comment. You know, I might get in trouble if I have to comment. So I keep my hands clear of the political thing. I'm a culture man. I deal with we music, we culture. I want to see the pitch league developed, and I've been trying that since '89. I've been trying that. You understand what I'm saying? Since
Yeah.
'89, I know what it can do, and I know what it can do for the community, etc., etc. But and I've been to a lot of meetings, a lot of workshops, and all of that. Nothing seems to be happening. But your guest is here. I don't want to take.
Mr. Abdullah, good afternoon. If you could
Good
put on your
afternoon.
camera, it would be great.
Uh,
It would be great to see you. Seeing now we
yeah,
on YouTube and
I,
Facebook too.
yeah, I will put on the camera as soon as I stop driving. But I'm driving right now, so I
Oh,
can't put on the
okay.
camera right now.
Oh,
I'm
All
right now.
right.
I have a hands free, just so nobody figures I'm breaking the law. Yeah.
yes.
All right. All right.
All right. Okay. All right. Thanks for having me. Apologies for being late, but the weather and the traffic was quite bad, and so I got a little late getting to my location. Yeah.
Okay.
It's good to have you. It's good to have you. To the listening public, the voice you're hearing is a voice that you'll be more familiar with than mine. This no other than Mr. David Abdullah. Mr. Abdullah, thank you so much for making yourself available to us. We just wanted to carry a conversation with you about everything in general and nothing in particular, meaning the politics of Trinidad and Tobago. Have been actively involved in so many ways through the years. Um, I want to start by asking you this. your background, your and I'm not. I hope I'm not overstepping, but you come from a deeply religious background, if I put it that way. Um, your
Yes, my
your
father was the Bishop of Trinidad and Tobago. He's still alive, actually. He's 97. Yes, so that is a fact. Yeah.
when having grown up in the church, as we say, right? Having grown up with that sort of background where your father being uh, a bishop and so on, and a very prominent bishop who served this country in so many ways, and God has blessed him with good life. I believe he's 97, as you said.
Yeah.
Um, you know, one would expect that someone who gets involved in the politics of this country, that the politics is not exactly a place for people who are steeped in the traditions of the church. You have politicians who are involved in the UNC and the PNM who there is so much innuendo attached to the job that they do and to the things that how they execute the job. How do you feel involving yourself in politics when you have such a deep religious background, and one can tell from the way you conduct yourself that you're very, very meticulous and particular in the way you conduct your public life. Do you feel that you have the chops, if called upon to lead with integrity and not be affected by the dirt and grime that is associated with our national politics?
Well, yes. I mean, the thing is that while my dad, Anglican priest and so on, and then later on bishop, and my mother obviously both was very active in the church as well. But they both of them were socially conscious. I mean, you have to understand. My mother was born in Canada. She of Japanese parents, and so both my grandparents on my mother's side were born in Japan. And in the Second World War, they lived in Vancouver in British Columbia. In the Second World War, the Canadian state rounded up all the Japanese Canadians on the West Coast, the Americans in the same to the Japanese Americans on the West Coast, and put them up in camps up in the Rocky Mountains. So my mother experienced a tremendous amount of injustice and so on, and racism after the war. My father my father's father would have been discriminated against by the British colonial state, not being able to rise above a certain level in the colonial civil service as it then was in Trinidad. And my father went to university first in the United States, University of Pennsylvania, and had to battle racism there. So, there are people in the church, maybe less so now, but certainly at a certain time, who were very much about social justice issues. And so that was the context. We always understood the issue of respecting ordinary people, and that you must serve. That was always an important concept. Unto whom much is given, much is expected. So my getting involved, I got involved in politics, student politics, to starting off with, progressive radical student politics at University of the West Indies when I was 18. And I was treasurer of the guild in my first year at UWI. I was president of the guild in my second year at UWI. And then I contested the elections in 1976 for the original United Labour Front. I contested the Tunapuna seat. So, and then from there I went to join the Office Workers Trade Union in February of 77. And I spent 39 years at the union. So, yes, so I think my parents' sense of conscience and social justice was part of my upbringing, and then I pursued it in my own way in progressive politics and trade unionism from the time I was 18 to now. And the thing is that my experiences, and I've had many leadership responsibilities. As I said, I was a student leader when I was 18. In the Oil Workers Trade Union, I was a member of the central executive of the union, led by George Weeks, when I was in 1982, when I became executive treasurer. So I was, about 28 or something like that. I headed the education department when I was 24. So I've had leadership positions, even in secondary school, in Jamaica. I just visited there when I was on holiday a week ago, and I was head boy of my boarding school, the Catholic College, when I was 15. So leadership responsibilities have never been far from me, and therefore working with people and making important and tough decisions, but also ensuring that you work with people and build team and try and achieve objectives has always been part of my life. And therefore, holding national office, I was chairman of the board of Cipriani, the Cipriani board of the board of governors of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, and led the major transformation of the college, the construction of the building, the expansion of the curriculum into bachelor's degrees and a whole range of other things, transform the organizational structure and the employment arrangements at the college and so on. Huge transformation under my leadership. So leadership is not something that is foreign to me, but leadership style is very important, that you do it in a way that involves everybody and that is not top down, is participatory, and therefore you get buy-in from everybody. So that's very important. So I've stopped now, so I'm going to, I'll have to hold the camera, but I'm stopping now, so I'll put on the camera, yeah?
Great. It's good to see you. Now,
Good.
one of the concerns that I have when I listen to you is I wonder to myself, and this is just my view, the cotton trust of our parliamentary politics and what happens within the parliament, the mudslinging, the things that are being said about each other, that toing and froing. And it was said on I could repeat this part of it. It was said on the Hansard where one of the leaders there was referred to as a rapist and a child of a rapist. We've had in the past where Basil Pandey was accused of sexual harassment of a fellow parliamentarian. That sort of activity within the parliament and things being said about aspersions being cast on the character of persons within the parliament, certainly they would not be able to say something like that about you. But my concern was that whether you think you can sanitize the behavior of politicians and get them to follow a different template in terms of how they conduct their affairs, because the parliament has become a very caustic environment where we see the things that are being, the mudslinging and the things that are being said about each other. Very recently, Stuart Young was caught saying something on the mic, unbeknownst that it was on, where he was casting certain aspersions and saying certain things that wasn't nice. Not that I'm going to repeat it here, but it's in the public space. Politicians conduct themselves in a way that, if you have young UE graduates and young children listening, or simply people looking on, you may not want to emulate some of the things that you're seeing there. So my concern was, and I think you've answered the question, my concern is when you find yourself in that sort of environment, how it's either you fall in line, you trump and follow suit, or you try to change the culture. Changing the culture is trying to change people inside there, and it's all men you're trying to change. People who've been doing this thing for decades.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you have the chops to command that sort of respect and to inject your values into that environment and have them conduct themselves differently?
Well, it's interesting, as you were speaking, you mentioned, you said Trump and follow suit, because Trump is perhaps one of the worst examples of that kind of behavior. So it's not peculiar to Trinidad and Tobago. And certainly when it takes place in countries like the United States, a lot of us tend to want to copycat, or we want to follow the same playbook, and maybe even have the same kind of political advisors as exists up north. So you're right. This public discourse coming from the two main parties has deteriorated very significantly over the last more than 10 years, I would say. And when Mr. Pandey died, it was interesting because the media showed several pictures of Mr. Pandey and Mr. Manning meeting each other, both in and out of say, Parliament, and, you know, laughing and sharing a joke and so on, and engaging in a mutually respectful way. And there were heated debates in the Parliament between Mr. Manning on the one hand and Mr. Pandey on the other. But the debates never degenerated into the nasty. And there's something that has changed in our discourse generally in the society, and it's reflected by the politicians, and perhaps the politicians are magnifying and amplifying the nastiness, you know, the personalizing of matters. So rather than debate a policy or an issue, you start attacking the individual who's putting forward a different point of view to yours, or what you may believe is a different point of view. When I was in Parliament, I served just for 2 years in the Senate, 2010 to 2012. Of course, the Senate is supposed to be less confrontational in that sense. It's supposed to be somewhat of a more, you know, a cut above the personal things. And so that debate, we had serious debates and so on, but it was never that nasty in the Senate. But I mean, I've been in the trade union. I was in the trade union movement, and while people didn't get personal, there were major battles in the trade union movement. So I'm not unfamiliar with intense argument and debate, and very heated ones at that. I remember in 2000 there was a conference of delegates of the National Trade Union Center. McLeod was the president, but he was the outgoing president, and there was an election and so on. So the election degenerated in terms of two camps, and it was getting very heated. And McLeod, then President General of ODBQ, also then said, you know, he putting everybody out the building, right? So everybody had to leave the building because things were getting so tense. So you know, I think leaders have to set an example. And as has been said, words mean something, and actions also mean something. And if we therefore have leaders who go into the gutter and to the lowest common denominator, then we can't criticize young people for how they are behaving. So if we want to change, and you're right, how does a culture change? Lloyd Best asked the question, how does a culture escape from itself? And so persons who are at the top do have to set some kind of example. And so when I speak, you know, I try to inform and educate while making strong political points, but not necessarily getting nasty. One doesn't have to go down in the gutter. One doesn't have to go down in the gutter. And the media has a key role to play too, if I may say so, because there's some talk show hosts, and I was a talk show host, you know, on Power 102. I was one of the very first talk show hosts in Trinidad and Tobago, on Power 102 many moons ago in the late 90s, you know, and we had excellent discussions in the night. If I ran a program from 8 to 9 o'clock, and sometimes on a Sunday morning as well. And we had excellent discussions, and it's important that you elevate and help people to understand and raise people's consciousness. And you can't do that by simply going down in the gutter.
Allow me to ask this. If you look at the trend of political leaders in this current dispensation, meaning in the last 10 years or so, the president of New Zealand was someone just about, I believe, mid-30s when she came into public office. There were a number of world leaders that are young persons in their late 30s and early 40s. Trudeau in Canada was the same thing when he came into power. What is your view in terms of young people assuming the reins of leadership at that level? You know, it's often been said that we have people here, two of the persons contesting the elections in 2025 would be in their 70s, which is Mr. Rowley and Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar. You know, we have a tradition in our politics where it's persons of senior age, senior vintage, if I might put it that way. You yourself, I'm not too sure where you lie in that spectrum, but you're certainly not a young man in your 30s and 40s.
Correct.
What is your view in terms of, do you see that the trend of young people leading political parties and contesting elections, it's a healthy thing, or you think that you need more mature minds and more mature heads to govern a country?
I think you need both. Certainly, the U.S. elections that took place just over a week ago, you originally was supposed to be Biden versus Trump, round two. But people said that to have two men who are in their late 70s didn't make sense. Biden withdrew under pressure. Trump remained. But I do think that you have to have younger people taking on more and more responsibility of leadership. As I just described that, in the Orpheus Workers Trade Union, I was given a lot of leadership responsibility when I was very young. And when you look at all fundamental change that has taken place, Maurice Bishop in 1979, Maurice was in his mid-30s, 35. Martin Luther King, when he was assassinated, was 39 and had, in the years leading up to that, generated a huge amount of social change. So Malcolm X was also 39 when he was assassinated. Fidel was a young man when he led the Cuban Revolution to victory in 1959. So I do think it is necessary, particularly if you want to get significant change, to have that energized and led by young people. And that is something that we in the MSJ have spoken about in terms of succession planning and so on. It hasn't worked to this point, but I'm certain that by sometime next year, you will begin to see a number of young people coming forward within the MSJ, taking on more and more responsibility and leadership.
But if we look up the Caribbean, Mr. Mitchell, the Prime Minister of Grenada, is
very young.
Yeah, he's in my estimation, he was born in 1978. I'm seeing here, so that's what, he's 46 years of age.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing when we see. I think the Prime Minister of St. Kitts is also, or the Premier of St. Kitts, it's not a Prime Minister. The Premier of St. Kitts is also a very young person. It helps sometimes when we have, young persons assuming these positions, at least a young demographic in this country, because I believe the latest CSO report indicates that in Trinidad and Tobago, in a population of 1.3 million, we have some 300,000 persons between the ages of 18 and 30, and another 300,000 between the ages of 30 to that 40 bracket. So it's though the population is what it is, it's a considerable amount of people demographic that would have to look towards electing someone who they may feel may not be in sync with their values or their view of the world.
Yeah, and the point is that those of us who are not young anymore, we have less of our life ahead of us than the young people do, and therefore setting the agenda and the future is really the responsibility of young people, because it's going to be their life, it's not ours. And I think that is a very important point to make and to commit to. So it's necessary to not simply say that the future is for the youth. The future really has to be, as C.L.R. James wrote an important book called The Future in the Present. The future is now in this present. And young people therefore have to be given responsibility. So it'll be interesting to see what emerges in the two traditional parties. You mentioned both Dr. Rowley and Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar are already in their 70s. So it'll be interesting to see what lineups they present in terms of members of parliament, persons to contest seats as members of parliament, and therefore what is the likely succession plan that they have going forward, because nothing in life is certain, and young people themselves are falling down with heart attacks and strokes. So while one doesn't wish ill on anyone, you could never be certain that someone is in their 70s wouldn't then become unable to carry out their responsibilities. And the question therefore would be who will lead.
Exactly. And just to confirm, I was checking here, Terence Drew, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts, is age 48. The Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerritt, he's age 52. So
and he's been around for a long time, eh?
Exactly. I think he's been around for about 20 years. So he's been at it for some time.
Yes.
Let's get a little bit into our politics. In Trinidad and Tobago, the MSJ is one of those parties that is not one of the traditional PNM UNC or PNM DLP or PNM ULF. It was one of those, if I may put it this way, I don't mean to offend, one of the smaller parties that have been of recent origin. Very effective. You've been very forthright with your views and where your values and ethos stand as a political organization. But when we examine, and this is, I want to just make some references before you comment. When we examine the history of electoral politics in Trinidad and Tobago, it's about 100 years in age. I'm looking at a book I have here written by one Dr. Trevor Grant. His analysis, he's indicating that it is important, I'm quoting here, it is important to note that the number of elected members have increased from 7 seats in 1925, 9 seats in 1941, 18 seats in 1950, 24 seats in 1956, 30 seats in 1961, and 36 seats from 1966 to current time, right? Well, 36 from 66 to 2002, and 41 seats from 2007 to now. So we've had a history of electoral politics stretching back to 1925, and the number of seats that are being contested range from as little as 100 years ago to what we have now, 41 seats in 2024. But if it is we were to examine the history of party politics between 1961 and 2002, barring the narrow breaking the pattern, we've had 2 political parties occupying the seat of office. How do you feel about the MSJ's posture in the landscape of our electoral politics? Are you of the view, based on the trend, based on the pattern that we've seen, that the MSJ has the capacity to contest a general election on a national scale and secure majority in terms of the 41 seats? Or do you think that you may be forced into a position of seeking an alliance in order to have an effective say in Parliament? Because with the first past the post system of electoral politics, unless you have a certain majority, you're placing yourself in a position where you will be a minority in the Parliament, and when votes have to be cast in order to have an effective say in passing legislation, in effecting policy, unless you're aligned to one of the PNM or the UNC, you find yourself in a position where you're effectively in the Parliament, but unable to really have that effect in terms of getting your say on pieces of legislation or impacting the legislation and policy. Are you of the view that the MSG as an entity has that sort of firepower to get a majority in the 41 seats available? Or are you of the view that you're happy to be in this space, you're happy to be projecting your views in the Parliament if given the opportunity, and having an effect from within rather than leading in a vanguard position?
All right, so that's quite a big one, and the historical leading is interesting. And let me just add to a bit of the history, because of course 1925 was the very first time that people had the right to vote, but that right to vote was limited, and in fact it the limited right to vote in the 1925 elections was as a result of the general strike of 1919-1920. It wasn't a strike when everybody was off the job at the same time. It was kind of a rolling strike that began on the docks in 1919, led by the Trinidad Working Men's Association, which was led by rank and file dock workers. It wasn't led by Captain Cipriani at the time. He came in the early 20s. And workers in sugar, in oil, the Pitch Lake, and railways and elsewhere went on strike. And in response to that, the British colonial government passed a number of draconian pieces of legislation, including the summary offences ordinance, the sedition offences, which banned so-called seditious literature like by Marcus Garvey and so on. But they also then introduced limited franchise. And that was a result of a commission of inquiry known as the Wood Commission of Inquiry. And the franchise was limited to people who had a certain amount of property or money in the bank and who were literate in English. And that was particularly important because there were some former indentured laborers who may have gotten property coming out of their indentureship, and may have been very literate in Hindi or Sanskrit or Urdu, but weren't literate in English. So it really excluded the vast majority of the people in Trinidad and Tobago. But Captain Cipriani and a number of others who were part of his TWA were elected to the Legislative Council. The Parliament at the time was not, as we know it now, with a lower and an upper house, as they say, House of Representatives and a Senate. It was a single chamber. And the colonial governor sat as a speaker in that chamber, and he picked the persons who were the non-elected members of the chamber, who were basically people who represented the status quo, the ruling classes, those who supported the colonial arrangements. And so you had at the beginning those 7 elected members. And you're right, it moved in time. Of course, we then got full franchise. First election of full franchise was 1946, and that came about as a result of the 1937 general strike and anti-colonial struggle, which was led by people like Hubert Uriah Buns Butler. So it's important to know that the working people, the working classes, were the ones who fought for democracy, for the right to vote, to have the power, therefore, of trying to determine their own destiny politically. And what happened over the years, and people have written about this, very important people like Rex Nettleford, George Lamming, many other Caribbean progressive intellectuals have written and making the point that what then happened was that the British colonials educated a professional middle class who took over the political parties or who organized the political parties, and essentially made a pact with the ruling elites, with those who control economic power, not to transform fundamentally the old plantation economic system and make it more equitable and fairer and more just. And so our political parties really have been there to maintain the status quo. And Professor Brinsley Samaru, God rest his soul, used to make the point very forcefully that the British were excellent at divide and rule, not only here in Trinidad and Tobago, but throughout the empire that they had controlled. And that divide and rule therefore enabled the status quo to remain intact. And so the masses of the people, the working people, got divided. Here in Trinidad, and it was by race. And of course, then we have the difference between Trinidad and Tobago. But that then has maintained the economic structure and so on, and our political arrangements, our existing constitution, are really the old colonial constitution. We are maintaining the old colonial construct. So you then have enabled a system of prime ministerial dictatorship by the very nature of the constitution. So in this
I think we're having a slight breaking in our connectivity. Yeah.
I should have come back by now. Yeah, somebody was trying to call and it interrupted my phone. Yeah, so we did so with the hope that we could from within, shift one of the major parties to take positions that were not radical or that far-reaching, but would at least take positions that would do something to improve people's lives at the bottom, strengthen the trade union movement by changing labor legislation, and engaging in a process of constitution reform that would create a more participatory system of governance, more accountable, and so on and so on. When that wasn't forthcoming, we then left. Now, coming to the current question that you're asking, obviously, as a party, we are committed because of our philosophy of social justice, because we stand for something. And incidentally, we have contested elections, mostly at local government elections, and we have lost. Every seat we have contested, we have lost. But significantly, from 2012, which is when we left the government, to now, is 12 years. We are the only political party that has been able to survive and exist and be relevant in terms of the issues of the day for 12 years without holding a single position in government, not local government, not central government, and so on, and therefore not having any access to the organs, parliamentary space or local government space and resources and any of that. We have had none of that, but we have survived. But if you look at all of the others, NAR, this one, that one, they've all basically disappeared. So it says something about the importance of believing in something, having a philosophy, having an ideology, standing up for something, and be willing to work for that and to fight for it, and so on in the long haul. Now, the two-party system, that culture rather, I wouldn't say system, because it's not a two-party system. It's a culture of two parties that the British created and encouraged, where one or the other party appeals to one or the other ethnic group in the country. That has made it very difficult, as has the culture of money in politics, where you have big financiers who put a lot of money in, and those financiers often have one party card, called that party is PIP, Party in Power. And so they invest in the parties, and when one of their parties wins, they then get a payback on their investment, a rate of return in contracts. So we have this system of money and the culture of division by race and religion and other factors like that. And therefore, that makes it extremely difficult. And you mentioned the first past the post system, where we don't have proportional representation. So many people, I remember in the 2020 elections when I was contesting Point-a-Pair, we were making steady progress. I wouldn't say we would have won, but we were making progress, and our message was getting through. And then in the last week of the campaign, both the parties started running on the ground the line that if you vote for MSJ, you're gonna be causing the other one to win, right? In other words, you're splitting the vote. So don't split your vote, or don't split the vote by voting for MSJ, because that will cause, if you're a UNC supporter, that will cause the PNM to win, or if you're a PNM supporter, that will cause the UNC to win. So I actually, with my campaign team, recorded a message to try to counter that, and had it moving around, because we didn't have time to physically spread that word in person, but I did it with a voice recording and on an audio tape, and that was moving around the constituency on a music truck for several days. It didn't work, because that thinking that you split the vote or you waste your vote by voting for MSJ or third party is another aspect of the culture, which is why we probably do need to have, as MSJ has recommended, a mixed system of electing people to parliament. Some people being elected first past the post constituency basis, and some people being elected to the House on the basis of proportional representation, so that other parties and other, not just parties, more importantly, the views of many people in this country, and I would say at least 30 to 40% of the people in this country, do not support either the PNM or the UNC. And maybe more. Some will vote one way or the other, depending on the moment. And therefore, you need to provide or have a political system which enables the voice and therefore the views and the position and the interests of this very large number of people to be reflected in the composition of the parliament and therefore in what the parliament debates and discusses on what legislation is passed or what policies are implemented. And you therefore need to have some people elected to parliament by proportional representation. And therefore it is difficult for a party like the MSJ to break through, but you could never tell. You mentioned some of the other Caribbean islands, West Indian islands. I don't know if you remember in St. Vincent many years ago, when was that, about 1980 or thereabouts, I don't remember the year, when Son Mitchell, as he was popularly known as, contested won his parliamentary seat in what island was that? Bequia, or one of those islands like that, one of the smaller islands, it may have been Bequia. And because he won that seat, the other two main parties at the time tied, and he became the prime minister, yes, with one seat, because he formed an alliance, but he was in the driving seat, literally. And then after that election with just one seat, he then became prime minister and stayed prime minister for very many years. So you could never tell what could happen, even in the context of our existing arrangements.
Would you all consider aligning yourself with any of the main political parties, meaning either the UNC or the PNM, or is it that you're going alone? Or is it too early to say?
We have not taken a formal decision about what our electoral intervention will be in 2025. We have been analyzing the situation carefully at the level of the leadership. And when the time comes, we'll make a formal announcement. I can say, however, that, and I made that point in our Citizens Assembly last night in Point 14, that we are faced with a PNM government led by Dr. Rowley that is seeking to fundamentally restructure the society of Trinidad and Tobago and push it back to a colonial type structure where you have a few people at the very top who are living obscenely well. They're living a life of total luxury. And then you have another sector just below them who are doing well. They're very comfortable. They can go on family holidays every year. They can change their car every 2-3 years. They live in a good home, and so on and so on. They don't have a worry about paying their mortgage or buying food or any of those things like that. They could send their children to the best schools, and so on. They go to all the all-inclusive fetes, etc., right? So they're very comfortable. They're not necessarily living a life of obscene wealth or luxury, but they're very comfortable. Then you have a very large number, the majority perhaps, or close to majority, 40%, who are barely making ends meet. Your public servants, your teachers, many of the workers in businesses and so on. They are working, yes, they're getting a salary, so they can manage, but they can't, they're barely making it from payday to payday. Yes. When the month end or the fortnight comes or the week comes, they literally have very little money in their pocket. And then there's another very large number of people who are working for minimum wage or not working at all, and they're catching their backside, they're catching their tail, as we would say in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's a growing number, a very large number, and it is growing. And when you have situations like the closure of the refinery and the retrenchment of all the workers at Petrotrin, and many contractor workers lost their jobs, the closure of ArcelorMittal, the closure of Unilever, one of the oldest manufacturing companies in Trinidad and Tobago, and things like that. You other retrenchments at TSTT and TIDCO and other places. What you get is the working people who had a solid position of employment, a solid job. They were able to buy a home, or if not, they're paying their rent. They were members of a credit union. They had a motor car. They were able to send their children to university and so on and so on. Solid, what the Americans call middle class. I'm not calling middle class as working class, but a middle income working class. And they therefore laid down roots in our society. They saw a future for themselves, a future for their children and grandchildren. Now, there's a large number of people who see no future for themselves here. Young people who go to university, they know jobs for them, or they're on contract employment for 3 months. We have doctors, senior doctors in our public health sector who are working on 3 months and 6 month contracts. Can't buy a home, and they're doctors. They'll migrate, they get frustrated. There's no sense of future in Trinidad and Tobago. And then other young people, the 55% who failed CSEC or didn't get 5 subjects with maths and English this year, and that's been going on for the last 30 years. What is their future going to be? So the PNM government is creating this type of society where there's little hope, little future for the young people, where others who middle-aged, who's supposed to be trying to put down roots and grow roots and therefore strengthen the community, strengthen the family, strengthen the community and build a nation, they're being decimated as well. And that is a society that we oppose. And therefore, our position is that a continuation of these policies under this PNM government would be utterly disastrous for the next 5 years. But we haven't taken any position in relation to supporting or being part of any alliance or coalition with anybody.
From your narrative and your take on things, the editorial of what you're saying seems to speak to the fact that you're of the view that the economy isn't growing, and on the levels where people are full employment is the say of the day. Or let us put it this way, there are people unemployed because the economy isn't growing to socially and politically and economically uplift everyone at the same time. Are you of the view that there are poor people out there in mass or en masse who are not making ends meet at the end of the day in this country? Because Stuart Young doesn't seem to be of that view. The Minister of Finance doesn't seem to be of that view. It has been said that the economy of Trinidad and Tobago has been growing by the politicians.
Sorry,
have been growing over the past 2 to 3 years.
Yes, the call dropped for a moment. Sorry for it. Yes.
All right, I'm saying that the parliamentarians on the government side, the Imbert, Stuart Young, the Prime Minister, is of the view that the economy of Trinidad and Tobago has been growing in the past 3 years, and our inflation levels are the lowest levels in the world. Imbert has been saying, and so much so that it's indicating that our employment levels or unemployment levels, the unemployment levels aren't at an alarming rate. It's just below 10%, which seems to be, in their view, manageable. The social services that are available are sufficient and accessible that those who are not in need can access support from the state. Are you of the view that these sort of indicators are viable ones that are being shed upon the population by the sitting or the incumbent government? Or are you of the view that people are, because from your narrative it seems to be that you're of the view that people are struggling out there, that people on the ground are struggling?
Yeah, people are struggling. I mean, one of the problems of the unemployment or the labor data, the data on the labor market, is how it is measured. So Professor Roger Hussein has been making an important point. He's been looking at that. I don't have the data in front of me, but he's made the point many times, which is that there is a very low participation rate in the labor force. In other words, of what is known as a non-institutional population between the ages, I think, of 18 and 60. I think that's how the labor force is defined, yeah? In other words, people who are not in jail and who are not in school and so on, not in university, they are defined as the labor force. I don't have the number, but it's probably around 800,000 or somewhere close to that. But a lot of that age bracket who are not in jail, not in school, are not actually counted as being workers because they're not looking for work. Yes. So to be a worker, you either have to be employed or looking for work, and that looking for work has to be within a certain period just before the data was being collected. So if you look around, I'm sure you would agree that in Trinidad and Tobago, you have a growing number of people who are selling things by the side of the road. You see somebody with one little heap of mangoes when mangoes was in season, or you see them with 3 pumpkins and a little bit of cassava and so on, and some tomatoes or some limes or something like that. Or you see young people now more and more by traffic lights looking to clean windscreens, and so on. So there's more and more in what is very, very informal work, yes, which
Yeah.
is subsistence living at the very, very best. I don't know how people survive on that kind of thing, because they get very few dollars in their pocket at the end of the day. And they're not counted as part of the workforce. So we have a major problem of underemployment in that regard. And that has to be picked up and discussed. So you can't just talk about the official unemployment rate. You have to look at what is the level of people who are underemployed, and then those who are not working at all but might be engaged in criminal activity. So we do have a problem of employment in the country. It's not only the numbers but the quality of the jobs too. Most of the jobs that are being created are in the service sector, security guards, workers in fast foods and that kind of thing, and those jobs are not necessarily well paid. In fact, they're paid minimum wage, long hours, they're semi-skilled or unskilled jobs, and that is not good. On the other hand, you have people who are engineers and doctors who can't get employment. You have engineers who drive in taxi, right? Uber type, drop share or ride, drop taxi or ride share taxi. So we have a labor market that is not good, not good at all. And the in terms of things like foreign exchange, which is a major issue of debate, and I have to issue, I've not a chance to issue a major statement on it. I'll probably do it by weekend. But the foreign exchange issue was one when I was a member of the Economic Development Advisory Board, together with the chair at the time, Dr. Terence Farrell, and people like Professor Carl Theodore, Dr. Marley Natz, and others, Dr. Roller Rampy. So we went and met with the Minister of Finance in 2016, fairly early 2016. And we point forward. And because supply was less than demand, and therefore there's a black market. And at some point you have to deal with it. Now, of course, the Minister of Finance did not want to go the route of devaluation, and we understand that. But and so how he's been trying to manage it is by foreign borrowing. And when you borrow money on like a bond market, or borrowing a US dollar bond or something like that, you get the money in US dollars, and that goes to the central bank, and the central bank then gives the government TT dollar equivalent, which it spends. And the central bank then has more US dollars available to sell to the commercial banks. And the other way of drawing down on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. Those things have what has maintained a certain level of foreign exchange in the country, given the fact that oil prices have fallen, gas prices have fallen, oil production has fallen, gas production has fallen, and because gas production has fallen, petrochemical production has been significantly reduced, ammonia, methanol, LNG, and so on, and therefore foreign exchange earnings from all of that has gone down. So we have not done anything really in the last 10 years to significantly diversify the economy, and at the same time, consumer tastes have demanding more and more foreign goods and so on. So we're importing more and more, producing less and less, and therefore we are in a foreign exchange crisis. And the government has not addressed that. And they had opportunities to do it. One was 9 years ago when the Economic Development Advisory Board was set up, because that is what we were working on, the diversification of the economy. And secondly, during COVID, which was an opportunity to do something very different given the crisis, particularly with respect to increasing food production to get people to buy local, because people were understanding that with something like COVID, we could lose our supply of imported food and other things like that. And therefore, I think there was a greater sense of focusing on the national. And the government lost the opportunity, did nothing coming out of COVID to diversify and to have a massive buy local campaign in the MSJ's Roadmap for Recovery document, which we produced in May, I think in beginning of May 2020, just 2 months after COVID. We recommended a massive buy local campaign, massive stimulation of agriculture, and so on, to ensure that we bring down our expenditure on items that are imported, and therefore better manage the foreign exchange situation.
Let's talk about the marginal seats. So much is being said in the election going into 2025 that it's about 135,000 persons that will be determining who sits in in terms of forms the new government or continue to stay in power. Tunapuna, you mentioned that you did contest the Tunapuna seat many years ago. Tunapuna is a marginal seat, and I was looking at some data in the year, yeah, a long time ago. In 1991, I'm just making some brief remarks in terms of the codes here, right? It's indicated, the figures that I have here is in the year 1991, just 2,699 votes separated one party from the other. It was a margin of, let's say, 2,700 votes in 1991. In terms of victory and non-victory, 244 votes separated the parties contesting in 1995. This is a quote for Tunapuna. In the year 2000, 1,503 votes separated the winner from the loser. In the year 2001, 276 votes. In the year 2002, 624 votes. Since Esmond Ford has been contesting that seat in Tunapuna in the last two general elections, it's again been a few hundred votes separating one from the other. Are you of the view that sufficient work has been done by your organization, by the MSJ, or in your observation by other parties in removing Esmond Ford from holding that, from taking that seat for the PNM? And I'm using Tunapuna as an example.
Yeah, no, where we are not active in Tunapuna, in the constituency of Tunapuna, we did contest way back in 2013, and one seat a couple of seats in the Tunapuna Piarco Regional Corporation, but not in, I don't think they were in the Tunapuna. Yes, one was actually in the Tunapuna constituency, because it came over from part of St. Joseph, Maraca St. Joseph, into St. Augustine. So that would have been in the Tunapuna constituency. And we contested another one that would have been in the St. Augustine, I think, constituency. So we have not been active electorally since then in this area. In 2019, we contested a number of seats in the Sawa Lavantil Regional Corporation, Diego Martin City Corporation, and so on. So and Superior Regional Corporation. So we haven't been active. So I don't know what the other political parties are doing. I know that I saw the UNC making a policy statement sometime recently at one of their meetings that was publicly, reported in the media, which is where I got it from, that they are focusing on a number of seats, the major seats that they believe the PNM holds, like Nahokata Talparo, St. Joseph, and I think San Fernando West. I think those are the three that they said the PNM holds, while they have to now hold on, and maybe Tunapuna, I'm not sure, and maybe the Toko seat. And then they now have to try and hold on to their marginals, which would include Maruga Tableland, Chaguanas East, and Maritaria San Juan, and so on. So there will be a battle royale between those two major parties in the what the pollsters and the political analysts have called the marginal seats. I've seen Gary Griffith saying that he's contesting St. Joseph, which is considered a marginal. So I'm not sure what his intention is by contesting St. Joseph, whether it is to help the UNC win it by taking away PNM votes, or helping the PNM to win it by taking away UNC votes. Your guess is as good as mine, right? So, everybody is going to be weighing up what they do in different areas. both in terms of the PNM and the UNC, in terms of their electoral strategy, and all the other parties will be weighing up what they will do. And so, as we get closer to the election, I'm sure that things will become clearer in that regard. The PNM is screening candidates for a number of those seats that are marginal, including Tunapuna, I think, is being screened, St. Joseph is being screened, San Fernando West is being screened, Laoketa Talpar is being screened. So it'll be interesting to see who their candidates are going to be in some of those seats. PNM has also chosen candidates in a number of the UNC areas like Barataya, San Juan, Abuga, Tableland, and so on. The UNC has not yet started screening screening candidates, so announcing who the candidates will be. So they seem to be a little bit behind, and some of their MPs, at least in the Sudan 5, if you want to call them that, have raised concerns about the slowness of the UNC to engage in the screening process and therefore to determine who their candidates will be, especially for some of those seats. So we will see how the strategies unfold by the two parliamentary parties, and also what other parties, including the MSJ, will be doing. Yeah, and trust me, when we make a statement about what we'll be doing, it will be a very thorough, clear, and transparent statement. And you could interview me and try and pick me apart on it when that time comes, whatever we say.
If it is the PNM is to retain political office, do you think, or are you of the view that it augurs well for social and economic mobility of the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Do you see people being enlightened and uplifted, or you don't see a better future in the next 5 years?
Not under the PNM, no. They haven't. Well, as I said, the social structure of the society is being ripped apart by the policies, and the policies that the PNM are pursuing, in economic terms, have been called neoliberal policies. Yes, it really is to liberalizing the economic arrangements in such a way that benefits big capital, and when big capital is benefited, it is at the expense of somebody. So it's a zero-sum game. So somebody wins and somebody loses. So when ordinary people lose and their incomes are going down, somebody else's income is going up. So you mentioned, for example, the government talking about the economy growing. So assuming that they're right, that the national economic pie has grown larger, of course, it is still smaller than it was 10 years ago because the production of oil and gas and so on have gone down. So the economy is smaller than it was 10 years ago, but it may have grown in the last 2 or 3 years. The point, though, is if the pie has grown a little bit larger, 1-2% is a marginal increase in the size of the pie. The question is, how is that pie being divided? And what the reality is that the pie is being shared up more and more unequally, so that some people are getting a bigger and bigger share of the pie, and more people are getting a smaller and smaller share of the pie. As we would say a long time, the big people eating cake and small people eating crumbs. And it's not peculiar to Trinidad and Tobago. That is inequality is something that is happening all over the world. And the Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz wrote a book a number of years ago called The Price of Inequality. And if you look, for example, at what is going to happen in the United States, although Trump says he's going to help ordinary people, look who is going to benefit. Immediately after the elections last week, Tuesday, the wealth of the top billionaires went up by 60%, because the stock market and their shares went up, and therefore they became, that much richer. The ordinary worker get an increase to match that? No. So these are some of the issues that have been happening globally. And Dr. Rowley himself said, on a CNC3 Morning Brew interview with Natalie Ligor, who used to be my co-host for a while at another radio station. He said, we have no problem if the rich get richer, because when they get richer, then they'll create more opportunities for the poor and for other people. And that is trickle-down economics. That's a classical articulation of trickle-down economics or neoliberal capitalism. And it has not worked anywhere in the world. It has caused more insecurity because more and more workers are working not as permanent workers, but as short-term contract workers, as gig workers, and so on. Insecurity also fuels fear. And that is what the populist politicians like Trump in the US, or people in England who did Brexit, or the people in Austria and Germany with the far right, Le Pen in France, they use the insecurity of working people to spread fear. And that fear is mobilized around race and religion and migrants, so that is Haitians who eating dog and cat in the States and so on. And that is the Trump line, and people who coming across the borders and are criminals and raping our women and so on and destroying the society. That kind of fear mongering and hate is extremely dangerous, but that is one of the outcomes of neoliberal capitalism when it begins to break down as a result of the insecurity that it creates. And that kind of society is not one in which we want to continue to develop here in Trinidad and Tobago, especially in the context of what you began by talking about much earlier. One of the things we began talking about, which is the nature of the political discourse by those parties, which are very nasty. And it would be horrible if we degenerate into a situation where we end up in racial conflict in this society as we seek to demonize the other and blaming them as the devil for the problems that we have as a country.
The Prime Minister is of the view that the PNM has been elected and re-elected into office 2015, 2020, and they have the mandate of the people to govern. He's of the view that the people are clearly satisfied with the pathway that the PNM have taken the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. And he's of the view that if we hold strain until 2027, then things will begin to improve with the advent of the dragon gas profits and so on. Do you see things the way he sees it? Clearly, from your trend and from your tone, you are not of that view, but he's bent on the fact that the PNM has a formula, and the formula is all geared towards moving us away from the hydrocarbon dependency and developing the economy in different ways to generate income and to balance the budget. We've been running a deficit budget for the last 9 years, but he's saying that things will improve, that they're laying the foundation and the track for things to move in the direction that we wanted. Do you share that sort of positive thinking, if I may put it that way? The doom and gloom seems to be coming from the people outside of incumbency.
Yeah, well, I think that sometimes people in incumbency live in a different bubble from the rest of the society. The crime situation, for example, is something that is frightening for most people in the country. And I mean, the Prime Minister himself and others have said the crime situation is bad, but for a long time they seem to be in denial about what was happening. They seem to have been in a different world. With respect to the foreign exchange situation, and the revenues bumping up again, tax revenues and economic growth from gas coming out of Dragon and Coquina, Manikin, and the other cross-border gas field. Come back to me in a moment. Yes, those things are important, because what is happening is that given our gas fields maturing and less gas being produced, if we want to maintain our position as a major petrochemical producer, downstream producer, LNG, and although that's not really petrochemicals, but LNG and ammonia, methanol, urea, and so on, then we're going to have to become more and more of a processor rather than just a producer and processor. In the same way that our refineries, and Dr. Rowley and they were saying, the petrochemical refinery we had to import oil. Well, from the first refinery that was built by Shell in 1908 down in Point Fortin as UBOT, United British Oil Fields of Trinidad, and then the Lisol refinery that was built at Point-à-Pierre, owned by Lisols of England, We have always imported oil for our refinery. We have never been self-sufficient in oil production to fill out the refineries. So we have always been a refiner that has refined other people's oil. So for him to say that that was a bad, arrangement was foolishness. It's not historically correct. It's not factually correct in the first place. And I'm going to write an op-ed because a lot of nonsense is being said about why Petroleum was closed by the government. And I've spoken about it. I've written about it. But I have to do another op-ed very soon. But the same model of the refinery where we are refining other people's oil is the model that they are pursuing with respect to our gas, with our petrochemical plants, then processing gas from Venezuela and so on, which is what Dragon is. Yes. And even though we may get cross-border gas from Coquina, Manikin, and the other cross-border field, which is our gas, which is a minority of the gas in that field, the majority lies in Venezuelan waters, we eventually will still be processing Venezuela's gas. So that model makes sense. The problem with that, however, is firstly that, well, there are two problems with that. One is there's an immediate problem. Will the Trump presidency cause that to collapse? We don't know, because Trump is a man who you never could tell what he might do. But certainly his indication that he's going to appoint Senator Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State does not bode well for either Cuba or Venezuela, because Rubio is extremely right-wing and hawkish against both Cuba and Venezuela. So what is that going to mean for CARICOM too? We don't know, but it could very well be very negative. So that is one problem. The second problem with the model is that it is not diversifying the economy. It is maintaining the dominance of the hydrocarbon sector, albeit with us not necessarily being only a producer of our own gas, but a processor of other people, of other people's gas. So there is still nothing on the horizon from this government, and we heard nothing in the budget last month to suggest that there's a major drive towards diversification. There were no major projects announced, no major initiatives announced. I mean, there are little things going on here and there, but nothing that could match or replace the hydrocarbon sector in terms of revenue for the government and foreign exchange earnings for the country. And so even though we might get a little ease, assuming that Trump allows us to continue with that arrangement with Venezuela and so on in 2 years' time, it will not fundamentally transform the economy. And, we have had oil booms and gas booms before. And at the end of those booms, the majority of the people ended up catching the tail.
All right. One of the concerns that I have is, if it is we examine where we are in terms of the election could be called at any point in time. The Prime Minister seems to be saying that, there's we're looking at November, minimally November next year. Whether enough ground has been covered by those in opposition or those seeking office like the MSJ and Hope and the NTA, whether you all have done enough work in order to convince the electorate that what are you all offering is something to embrace. Let me ask you a very direct question. People on the ground, all they're concerned with is what they could get in their hands. Would the MSJ, if it is they have that say, reintroduce a subsidy on the gas and the petrol and so on? Or is that something that pigeon has flown the coop, and we would be living with that sort of subsidy that was removed?
We haven't taken a policy position that we would reintroduce the gas subsidy in that way. But I could tell you on the tea and tech rate increase, we have a clear position. In fact, we had started a petition campaign on it. We didn't push it very hard, but we did get some, several thousand people to sign the petition. And that is that we are for the reintegration of the power generators, TGU and PowerGen, into tea and tech, And that would save $250 million a year and would prevent the need for a rate increase. So we have a clear position on tea and tech. Our position on water is that water is a basic human right, and therefore certainly a rate increase for WASA would not be something that we would implement at all, because water, we in fact ought not to be even having to be buying bottled water, because water is a basic human right. You can't live without water. You can live without food for a period of time, but you can't live without water for very, very long. So property tax, for example, we have a clear position on property tax, that property tax should have been started with industrial and commercial properties, because people are earning incomes from those properties. The big gas producers, the people who have office buildings renting for millions of dollars a year to the government, they're earning money on that, and yet they're paying no property tax on that. That is wrong. All those merchants in the cities and towns and so on expect the streets to be cleaned and garbage to be collected, etc. Excuse me, but they're not paying any property tax. But you want pensioners and people on small incomes to be paying property tax. So we should start with the industrial and commercial properties and then move to residential properties. And I would, if it was left to me, we would start with the properties that are most highly valued, in other words, the wealthy, and then come down the road to smaller people. So we have positions on a number of things that are important. And certainly in terms of tax policy, we are for a progressive tax policy, so that we would, which I just described in terms of property tax, but we would also address the income tax regime in several ways. This Minister of Finance has spoken about transfer pricing since 2016 budget, when he first was elected in 2015. And yet they have not up to now addressed transfer pricing by which the multinational gas companies sell a shipload or whatever of natural gas to a subsidiary of the same multinational at, say, $5 US per MMBTU, and then that subsidiary, which bought it at 5, sells it on the open market at 7 or 8. But that company is paying taxes, and we therefore get forex and taxes on the basis of 5 and not 8. And so we've been losing billions of dollars US over the years. And that is something that we would address, because that is Trinidad and Tobago's patrimony. The people's patrimony is our natural gas, and other people are making super profits, and we are not getting our fair share of that. So we would tackle that. We would also tackle other kinds of wealth taxes. Republic Bank just declared $2 billion in profit, and companies are declaring, bigger and bigger profits. Many of the companies are locating their profit centers outside of Trinidad and Tobago to avoid paying taxes and so on. All of those things have to be addressed, so that who have more corn must feed more fowl, and therefore the government could have the resources to deal with all the things that are necessary for the ordinary people. And also those who are not paying taxes at all, who should be paying taxes, we'd go after them. In terms of people who are corrupt, people who are in customs or BIR or licensing, wherever they may be, or the police or wherever they may be, who all of a sudden have a big house on their salary and their grandmother didn't will it to them. Those properties should be seized. Asset forfeiture should be.
What is your position on inheritance tax?
No, we don't believe in an inheritance tax. In other words, if a property comes from one person to the other, that or the transfer of that, you pay an inheritance tax. But if somebody is owning a property that was left to them by a family member, then they should pay the right property tax on that. So if they inherit a set of apartments or townhouses or office block that is being rented out to the government or whoever, then whoever owned it before, the family member owned it before, should be paying property tax. And then if the family member died or passed it on to another family member, the new family member must pay property tax. That's not inheritance tax. That is simply paying taxes that are due and fair.
Right, and I agree with that. But what if it is you inherit an old house in Maruga? You're saying, I mean, if it is one inherits a rental accommodation in terms of commercial property, and therefore that was generating income, one would believe that the person who transferred it would have been paying the taxes in order to be allowed to operate on that scale. So it's just a continuation when the property is, when ownership is passed. But when somebody's left, your grandmother died and leave piece of land that she had there, put on 25, 30, 40 years in the carcass. One
There
is
should
of
be
the
no
view that,
tax. Yeah, that shouldn't be taxed. That shouldn't be taxed. That shouldn't be taxed. No. If your grandmother got the land fairly and squarely, that shouldn't be taxed. No, we go after people whose assets were illegally gained. Yes, they have to be dealt with. So you see somebody, money laundering, for example, is massive in this country. You see some things going up and there's no business activity there, but a massive building, money laundering, the casinos and so on, money laundering. So yes, we have to go after the money launderers and because the white collar criminals are just as responsibility for the murders in this country as the young boys who are pulling the trigger.
Mr. Abdullah, I want to thank you for making yourself available. It's 6 o'clock. We spent the better part of an hour plus with you, an hour and 20 minutes. So thanks for your time. We will invite you again. It's been a good evening in terms of hearing your views. One can only hope that things would improve in this country, and hopefully we'd get this sort of stable, disciplined government that could effect change in the next 5 years. Thank you again.
2 quick ads on Saturday the 26th. Yeah, could I just plug 2 quick ads?
No problem.
In 10 seconds. On Saturday the 23rd, I convened something. It's not an MSG activity, but we call it People's Roundtable. And on Saturday the 23rd, we are having a hybrid session to discuss governance. It's our second Civil Society Summit of September, and the second one is going to be on governance. We have Independent Senator Suniti Maraj, we have energy consultant Tony Paul, and attorney at law and former Speaker of the House Nizam Mohammed, and at least one other person speaking. So that's our contribution to debate on changing things, yes, constitutionally. And then we're inviting people in Laventille and surrounding areas on Saturday. This now is an MSG activity to our Citizens Assembly at the Transport Industrial Workers Union Hall. This coming Saturday, the 16th at 2 p.m. We'll have a mini health fair, legal advice, and we're going to hear from the people of that community about what their issues are in our Citizens Assembly. So we are doing some work to try to build serious debate and discussion in the country.
Okay, great. Thanks for your time. Enjoy the evening, and we look forward to spending some more time with you after we invite you again. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Fareed. Let me thank Ambrose Blanc, Rapid Fire Entertainment, Bisnat Prasad, and Theophilus Henry for being part of the comment section here at Power 102 Digital on Hard Talk. Thank you, David.
Enjoy evening, everyone. Blessings, Thanks, David, on the way home. Thank you.
Take care. Have a good evening.
Okay, that's it for today's edition of Hard Talk with Fareed Ali, our special guest, David Abdullah,
thank you,
leader of the MSJ. Fareed will be back next Wednesday for another edition of Hard Talk right here at Power 102 Digital.